Hello, welcome to my end of July update / July wrap-up video. I had a fantastic month. I enjoyed everything I read. I even found a new favorite, which may or may not surprise people what book that is. And I visited family in New Mexico, which was wonderful. So I'll just briefly talk about the books I read at the beginning of the month, as I did talk more in depth about these in my mid-July update. The first one being Boy's Life by Robert McCammon, which I listened to on audio. This is a first-person narrative that is told from the character Corey's perspective in 1964 Alabama. The way that the setting is brought to life, the 60s in a small town, was so well captured, so creative. The characters were kind of quirky. It has a wonderful blend of dark humor plus impactful emotional moments. So it's a wonderful historical fiction book with some supernatural twists as well. It has a very clever structure. I can see why this author is so praised. Next book to mention is Red Seas Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch, book 2 in the Gentleman Bastard series. I did do a review. It was spoiler-free for both books 1 and 2, and I was so surprised how much I enjoyed book 2. I thought that the friendship between Locke and Jean went to a new level for me in book 2. I thought that there were wonderful female characters introduced in this book. I loved the island Vegas type setting, the gambling setting, and I also loved the nautical setting that takes place in the second half of the book. So this was a win for me personally. I have seen a couple of critical reviews in which people were not happy about certain things introduced in the beginning that don't really play a role in the plot later on, and I can understand that. I did try to make a case in my review that I also think that some of the things he introduces regarding the setting especially kind of pertain to the themes of the story, especially regarding social class. And I did appreciate how this kind of takes place in the backdrop of peace times rather than war, which a lot of fantasy seems to involve these days, is war or the aftermath of war. So I really enjoyed it for that reason, but I can understand certain criticisms, especially if you're more of a plot-driven reader than I am. Again, I just enjoyed that this series doesn't take itself too seriously, so I just had fun with it, and I was also surprised just how imaginative and even emotional at times it was. Next book to mention is Think Again, a nonfiction book by Adam Grant. This was about the art of rethinking, learning to be okay with being wrong and pivoting your thoughts, being open and flexible to learning and expanding your knowledge. And I think that's such an important message for all of us in this day and age. There were some fantastic implications for educators regarding experiential learning versus lecture that I thought was interesting towards the end. One of the questions he invites us to rethink in the book is how we ask young people, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because it kind of implies a fixed identity of what you become as an adult, rather than thinking of yourself as continuing to evolve and expand and change as you grow. And so maybe a better question would be, what kinds of things do you want to do when you grow up? So that you don't have to feel like you're fixed into one identity or one way of being. So I thought that was very interesting. I enjoyed this book overall and would recommend it. Next book that I talked about in my mid-month update was The Curse of the Mist Wraith, which is the first book in the Wars of Light and Shadow by Jenny Wirtz. And so this follows two princes. There's Lysair, who's a crown prince, and Erathon, who is a pirate, bastard, prince, mage-trained musician. They have very different backgrounds, different magical abilities. Lysair has the gift of light. Erathon has the gift of shadow, and they have to work together to dispel of this mist wraith that has cursed the sky of this land. And so this mist wraith has driven away some very beautiful magical creatures, including unicorns. So yes, there were unicorns in this world. So it has very imaginative magic, including music magic, and very beautiful nature descriptions. That's one thing that I love about the way Jenny Wirtz writes. She can write nature descriptions like no other. And of course that comes in handy as you go through these different lands in this series, especially, or in this book, I should say, especially as we are on much of a quest journey, especially for the first half of the book. I read this on ebook and then collected the hardback edition when I was visiting family in New Mexico. I got a bargain on this book, and I highly recommend checking out the hardback edition if you have access to it, because it does have the map, and I couldn't find the map on my ebook version for some reason, and it does have a glossary, so there's a lot of work that was put into this, obviously, and Jenny Wirtz is brilliant. I did have a similar experience with this book as I did with To Ride Hell's Chasm, in which it did take me a while to adjust to the writing style, which is no fault of the author. She is obviously very skilled with her vocabulary and with her command on language. But I do find that once adjusted, I'm so swept away, so immersed that I just completely devoured this story. As long as it was, I just devoured it. I loved it. So I'm very excited to discuss this with the others once they finish and we set a date up. Highly recommend checking this out, especially as the unicorn thing might appeal to people. I'm so glad that I started this because I think Jenny Wirtz is just, again, such a brilliant author and artist. I also got to Wolves of the Kala, book 5 in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, and I did double up on audiobook and ebook for this one. This was beautifully dedicated to Frank Muller, who was the audiobook narrator for books 1 through 4. If you don't know, Frank Muller had a tragic motorcycle accident which didn't allow him to continue the narration of the series and then later passed away in 2008. He was a brilliant narrator, and so this new narrator had some big shoes to fill, but I think he did a pretty good job overall. I have to say though, I don't think I would have enjoyed this book as much had I not gotten to Salem's Lot beforehand, and I had been warned that Wolves of the Kala spoils the heck out of Salem's Lot, and people were not lying about that. I was skeptical though, because even the prologue of Salem's Lot spoils Salem's Lot. But that said, this one takes it to a new level and also just kind of continues Salem's Lot. So for that reason, I just don't think I would have enjoyed this book as much. It's not so much about being spoiled, it's more about having been invested in the story of Salem's Lot and having been invested in the reemergence of a character that comes forth in Wolves of the Kala. Because I was already so interested and invested from having enjoyed Salem's Lot beforehand, it was more meaningful to me than I think it would have been had I not read Salem's Lot beforehand. So for that reason, even less to do with spoilers, more to do with just investment in story and character overall, I do recommend Salem's Lot before Wolves of the Kala. Now, Wolves of the Kala does feel kind of like a side quest in the story on the journey to the Dark Tower, but there is wonderful character development with each of the quartet members and wonderful sort of testing of trust within the quartet that I really enjoyed. Incredible meta stuff that happens towards the end. And I think that some of the things that I didn't connect to, which I can't really go into depth about here, I think actually are starting to have payoff as I'm reading Song of Susanna right now, as I started August with Song of Susanna. So I'll just mention that here, but overall it was so good that I was eager to continue right away with Song of Susanna. I also got to The Winter King by Bernard Cornwell, which is the first book in the Warlord Chronicles. Very highly recommended from Alan at the Library of Alexandria. And it was a priority series I wanted to start this year. And wow, it did not disappoint. Now, I did double up on audiobook and ebook again for this one because the narrator is phenomenal. This is told from a side character's perspective, Durful, and so it's told in first-person narration and sort of flashes back and forth to present day, to the past. So it's kind of a framed narrative in that sense. So it's interesting because it gives you a lot of intrigue as to how we end up where we end up. But that said, it doesn't quite have a sort of mission-based focus as you might expect like in a lot of fantasy, for example, but it still has incredible world building, incredible character work. The battle scenes, especially at the end, were so fun and so exciting. I can't wait to read on in this series. I'll be discussing this with Zara at some point, as well as Alan from the Library of Alexandria, I believe. But yes, I highly recommend this. It was so fantastic. Now to talk about my favorite book of the month, which may surprise people because I read from some brilliant authors this month. I read from Stephen King and Jenny Wirtz and Bernard Cornwell, but my favorite book of the month was Stoner by John Williams. Now, this was written in 1965. It takes place in the early 1900s. We follow a man named William Stoner, and he's from a farm, lives a very sheltered life, moves away to go to university, falls in love with academia, and you follow his life from beginning till the end. I think Jimmy said it best by saying that this book has no right to be as good as it is, given the premise alone, because we are following such an unremarkable man in one sense, but then there are so many layers brought forth through the prose. It's incredible the way that John Williams writes. I feel like I have to pick up more books by this author in the future. And the audiobook is free on Audible. I found out about that through Chatting with Nuts with Jimmy and Alan. But wow, I am so surprised by this story and how much of an impact it left on me. I don't think it'll be for everyone. I just don't, but wow. That's all I have to say. Now, I did get my mom to listen to the audiobook as well after telling her how much I was loving it, and she's just recently getting into audiobooks. And while I was visiting her in New Mexico, I re-listened to a lot of it while she was listening to it and fell in love all over again. We talked about the subtext of certain passages. One thing that she really loved about it, what she said, is that it's a very cohesive story and that not all authors are able to do that as well as this author was able to do that. And she felt like the experience of this book was so rich for her. It reminded her of her experience of reading Crime and Punishment, which I found out is one of her favorite books of all time. So it was very rich and beautiful, and it's one worthy of great discussion. So highly recommend Stoner by John Williams if you're into historical fiction, if you're into sort of a rich portrait of a person's life, if you're into academia. I think that might appeal to you as well. Maybe. It's very dark though. It's a very dark story and just a rich one, a very layered one. Beautifully, beautifully written. Definitely my favorite book of the month. It will probably be a favorite for the year, honestly. I'm just based on the way I'm still thinking about it right now. I do wish I had a physical copy so I can enjoy the prose visually. I will have to get one at some point. I'm surprised. Are you surprised? I'm surprised. So that about wraps up my July. Please let me know if you've read any of the books I mentioned or if you plan to read any of the books I've mentioned. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.